Hi, my name is Wesley Irvine. This is my video about my project. The title of my project was Optimum Enclosure Design for a Carpet Python. I think the enclosure I design will help to maintain good health of the snake, and the snake will not develop any new health issues that it did not have prior to coming to the college. I expect that the snake will not develop any new health issues once moved into its new enclosure. I also expect to find that the snake will be stressed for the first few weeks in its new enclosure. This is because the enclosure is much bigger than its previous enclosure, and it's a brand new environment with lots of new smells and things to climb on, which will take time for the snake to get used to. By completing this project, I aim to improve my ability to perform adequate research. As without adequate research, my project will not go well, and the snake will be put in danger if I put it into an enclosure that I have not adequately researched. This ability to do adequate research will also help me in the workplace, as if after doing a research, I will already have the ability to perform adequate research. This research will involve me finding out things like its natural environment, its diet, and its behaviour. This project will also help me majorly develop my practical skills, as the majority of the project is practical, as I have to set up the entire enclosure myself. This will benefit me as it will improve my chances of employment, as I will have good practical skills. I also aim to make the enclosure as much like the natural environment of the snake as possible. This will help reduce stress in the snake, which should make it feel more at home in its new environment a lot faster. This project will also help me develop my specific knowledge about the carpet python. This knowledge can then be transferred to other snakes and pythons, as a lot of the information will be the same for a lot of snakes. I also aim to develop skills like time management, design skills and organisational skills. These will benefit me in the workplace, as these are all desirable skills. My experimental hypothesis, H1, is the carpet python will maintain good health due to optimum enclosure design. My null hypothesis, H0, is optimum enclosure design will have no effect on the health of the snake. My project is to design and set up an optimum enclosure for a carpet python. So my dependent variable is the carpet python, and my independent variable is the enclosure design. The carpet python is found in habitats that vary from tropical rainforest to coastal and arid regions in Australia. These habitats will include grounds that have lots of vegetation and damp ground. Also, they will have lots of rocks and logs for the snake to climb on. These rocks and logs will also aid the snake when shedding. Their natural environment will also include lots of opportunity for them to climb quite high on lots of trees. They have also been known to make their homes in people's attics in Australia. Their natural habitat has quite a high temperature and humidity. The general temperature in the wild and what they are kept at in captivity is around 28 degrees Celsius. This can vary to be slightly lower or higher, but the temperature aimed for is around 28 degrees Celsius. These snakes are quite nocturnal, so they will be more active and feed during the dark hours. They will primarily eat rodents like rats or birds that are similar in size to quails. Some smaller pythons may prefer to eat lizards, but as they grow bigger will move on to things like rodents and birds. Carpet pythons have excellent heat sensor pits on their upper and lower jaw. This enables them to detect the body heat of their prey with excellent accuracy. So in captivity, when the food is offered, it should be heated up so that it is warmer than your hand. If the food is not heated up to be warmer than your hand, then the snake can often mistake your hand for food. This will result in quite a nasty bite. If this does happen, the best way to remove the snake from your hand is to forcibly blow air into its mouth. Once the snake is released from your hand, you must immediately hold the head to prevent the snake from striking at you again. The carpet python is an ambush predator, so it will wait for its prey to move in front of it before striking to kill it. The carpet python is not venomous, so it will constrict its prey before consuming it whole. Hatchlings will be quite nippy and defensive, which is to be expected, as when they are born they have to fend for themselves. But after a year or two in captivity, they will calm down and be a lot less defensive. They will be relatively calm when handled. The average enclosure size should be around half to 3/4 of the length of the snake in length. These enclosures do not need to be relatively tall, as long as they have plenty of opportunity to climb. But if a taller enclosure is available, then this will also be okay, as the extra height will provide the snake a lot more room to climb and exercise. The ideal enclosure should have more floor space than height, so the enclosure I am using for the carpet python is good, but it will be a lot better if it was turned on its side to be less tall and have more floor space. Also, because snakes are excellent escape artists, the door of the enclosure needs to be fully locking to prevent the snake from escaping. If available, some people will also convert a small room in their house to be the enclosure for their snake. If this is done, then you must ensure that the room is 100% snake proof and that it cannot escape from anywhere. The room also needs to be checked to ensure that nothing in the room will harm the snake. In the enclosure, the snake needs a water bowl that should be changed daily to have fresh water. This water bowl should also be big enough for the snake to fully submerge, as this aids it when shedding. When the carpet python is in breeding season, males should never be kept together, as they will display combat behaviour. This can result in very serious injuries to the snakes. They are bred in captivity by introducing the male into the female's enclosure, and if they are both peaceful and not aggressive towards each other, then they are left to copulate, which can take up to 12 hours. Once they have copulated, then they should be separated. Some males may also not eat during the breeding season. The most common health problem associated with the carpet python is an upper respiratory infection. This is caused by having the temperature and humidity too low in its enclosure. As long as the temperature is kept above 22 degrees Celsius and the humidity above 50%, then this can be easily prevented. Another problem among most snakes is dyseptisis. This is when the snake is unable to properly shed its skin. This can be prevented by ensuring that the snake's enclosure is cleaned properly and humidity is kept above 50%. This can also be prevented by ensuring the snake's enclosure has appropriate furnishings which will aid it when shedding. Also, to prevent this, do not have the temperature too high, as this can dry out the snake's skin and cause problems when shedding. Stomatitis, also known as mouth rot, is another common problem. This is usually seen on the snake as hemorrhages on the gums or an excess of mucus on the gums. Stomatitis is not usually the primary issue. It is usually a secondary infection. This secondary infection can be caused by the snake striking at the glass of its enclosure, which would cause damage to the snake's mouth. Stomatitis is best treated by first addressing the issue that caused the infection. Otherwise, the infection will just return. A topical antibiotic can also be given to the snake, which can help to reduce the infection. But if the primary issue is resolved, then this infection can leave naturally. The most common external parasite in snakes is mites. These are tiny creatures which will live under the scales or sometimes in the eyes of the snake and are extremely hard to kill. To kill the mites, the snake should be soaked in a betadine bath. If the snake is persistently trying to escape this bath, then a container with a lid can be used to ensure the snake stays in the bath, as long as the lid still gives the snake access to oxygen. Whether or not the snake's head went into the bath solution, the eyes and heat pits should be dabbed with mineral oil. Once removed from the bath, check the snake to see if any might still remain, dead or alive. Check the groove under the chin as well as the belly scales and the vent folds. If any mites are found, then remove them with a cotton-tipped swab dipped in mineral oil. This enclosure is still okay because the floor space is not too small, and the extra height in the enclosure provides the snake with a lot more opportunity to climb. The wood I am using for the hide is going to be strong and durable, and will be able to take the weight of the snake, so this hide should last for a long time. The logs I will use in the enclosure will be rough, which will aid the snake when shedding. The water bowl will be large enough and deep enough for the snake to fully submerge in it, as this will also aid the snake when shedding. The substrate I use will be suitable because the faeces of the snake will not completely ruin all of the substrate. Because it's orchid bark, only the pieces that have faeces on them will need removing. Also, the cocoa brick that I'll be using as well as the orchid bark will help to keep the humidity up in the enclosure. This can be hard to achieve with such a tall enclosure. The slate I'll use on top of the hide is also good, as it heats up well and will be a good source of heat for the snake in the enclosure. The artificial plants are better than real plants, as real plants struggle to survive in such a high humidity. Also, snakes tend to pull the plants out of their pots when in the enclosure. Artificial plants are also a lot easier to clean. The windbreaker material used for the hammock in the enclosure is extremely good, as it is durable. This is extremely important because it is going to be hanging from the ceiling of the enclosure and has to support the weight of the snake. The piece of astroturf that will be placed inside the hide is good because it provides an area for the snake to eat where there is no risk of it ingesting orchid bark. Also, this astroturf is easily cleaned if soiled. The sisal rope is also suitable because it is strong, thick and durable. This is important as the rope has to support the full weight of the snake without falling from the ceiling or breaking. The rocks I use in the enclosure will be good as they will help the enclosure to look more like the natural environment of the snake. These will also aid the snake when shedding. I chose to do this project as it will help me develop the skills I will need in the workplace. It will also help me develop my knowledge about reptiles, which is good, as after I finish college I want to work with reptiles. The skills I will develop are The ability to work effectively on my own, as I will have to do most of the practical work and research on my own. I will also develop the skill to work as part of a team, as I am able to make use of staff when I need them. Also, I will develop my time management skills. This is needed, as if I do not manage my time well, then I will not complete my project in time. This could result in me failing project and not handling the last assignment. Also, if I do not manage my time well, then the snake could arrive before I have set the enclosure up for it. This project will also help me develop my knowledge about reptiles, as I will learn a lot of specific information about the carpet python, which can then easily be transferred to other snakes I may work with. My project will also benefit the college, as the enclosure I am using in the exotics room is a central enclosure and the first one you see as you walk in. This used to be empty, but once I have finished it will be a very aesthetically pleasing enclosure, which will attract a lot of attention from visitors. My project will also benefit the snake, as it will have an enclosure that replicates its natural environment as much as possible. This enclosure is also larger than its previous enclosure, which will give the snake a lot more opportunity to climb and potentially use muscles it hasn't used before. Also, because the enclosure replicates the natural environment, the snake should maintain a high level of health, and it should not develop any new health issues once moved into the enclosure. The equipment I used in my project was the enclosure itself, which measured 225 centimetres in height, 150 centimetres width, and 177 centimetres breadth, 8 metres of sisal rope, a 10 kg bag of orchid bark, 3 cocoa bricks which weighed 650 grams each, plywood, of which there was 2 lengths of 80 by 39 centimetres, 2 lengths of 55 by 39 centimetres, and 1 length of 80 by 55 centimetres. Slate, which was 1 length of 80 by 15 centimetres, and 1 length of 80 by 30 centimetres. Snow fencing, which had an entire length of 270 centimetres with a height of 39 centimetres. Cable ties, of which I used 20 small cable ties, 59 medium length cable ties, and 2 large cable ties. A plastic box, which measured 59 centimetres in length, 39 centimetres in width, and 9 centimetres depth. 2 logs. The larger of the 2 logs was 252 centimetres long, and the smaller log was 220 centimetres long. A heat mat which measured 45 centimetres by 30 centimetres. 7 varied artificial plants. The foil part of insulation, which measured 45 centimetres by 30 centimetres. Scissors, glue, Stanley knife, glass cleaner, which was 1 part vinegar, 3 parts water, dishcloth, paper towels, 12 pieces of black sugar paper, which measured 51 centimetres by 66 centimetres, 12 1-inch screws, a power drill, 2 hinges, 1 10-metre roll of black duct tape, 1 piece of astroturf which measured 80 centimetres by 55 centimetres, 8 rocks, which are all similar in size to 28 centimetres long, 18 centimetres wide, and 9 centimetres deep. Green windbreaker material, which measures 140 centimetres by 124 centimetres, a 3-step step ladder, a bucket, some sellotape, a jigsaw, a heavy-duty stapler, and staples. The first thing to do is to ensure all the equipment needed is in the same room as the enclosure, so it can be easily accessed when it is needed. The first thing to do to the enclosure is to secure the sisal rope to the roof of the enclosure. Firstly, a piece of rope is measured out at 140 centimetres. Then cut this from the rest of the rope using the Stanley knife and wrap black duct tape around either end of the rope to prevent it from fraying. Using the step ladder, one end of the rope is secured in the front right corner of the enclosure. This is secured to the ceiling using 3 cable ties to ensure that the rope does not come off the ceiling. Pull the cable ties tight and cut the excess off. The other end of the rope is secured in the back right corner of the enclosure, again using 3 cable ties, pulling them tight and cutting off the excess, using a pair of scissors. A second length of rope is then measured out at 160 centimetres. Then cut this from the rest of the rope using the Stanley knife and wrap black duct tape on either end to prevent it from fraying. Using a step ladder, secure one end of the rope in the front left corner of the enclosure. Use 3 cable ties, pull them tightly around the rope and cut off the excess. The other end is secured in the middle right of the enclosure, again using 3 cable ties pulled tightly and cut off the excess. Then measure a third the length of rope at 210 cm long. Cut this from the rope using the Stanley knife and wrap black duct tape around either end to prevent it from fraying. Secure one end of the rope in the front right corner of the enclosure. Use 3 cable ties, pull them tightly around the rope and cut off the excess using scissors. The other end of the rope is secured on the left hand side of the enclosure in the middle. Again, use 3 cable ties around the rope, pull them tightly and cut off the excess. The remaining length of rope should be 300 cm long. Wrap black duct tape around either end of this to prevent it from fraying. This length of rope is then secured from the back left corner of the enclosure to the front right corner. This is done by using 3 cable ties on either end of the rope, pulling them all tightly and cutting the excess off with scissors. The first of the 2 logs placed in the enclosure is the largest log, the one that measures 252 cm long. This is placed in the enclosure going diagonally from the front bottom left corner to the back top right corner. The smaller log is then placed in the enclosure going diagonally across. The single end of the log is placed in the back right corner of the enclosure with the 2 ends towards the left front of the enclosure, leaning on the larger log. The next step is to make up the substrate for the enclosure. This is done by firstly placing one of the 3 cocoa bricks into a bucket and then filling this bucket a quarter full with water. Then leave this for around 5 to 10 minutes so that the cocoa brick has time to soak up the water. After this time, begin to break up and mix the cocoa brick with the water. After around 5 minutes of mixing, there should be no solid pieces left and no excess water. If there are solid pieces left, then add more water so they can soak it up. If there is an excess of water, then pour it into the sink. Once this is made up, pour it onto the bottom of the enclosure. Then repeat this process with the other 2 cocoa bricks and pour them both onto the bottom of the enclosure. Then pour half the bag of orchid bark onto the bottom of the enclosure as well. Then begin to spread this out evenly so that it covers the entire bottom of the enclosure. Then the hide box needs to be constructed. Begin by using a jigsaw to cut out an arc-like structure from one of the 80 by 39 cm pieces of wood. This will act as the entrance to the hide for the snake. Then stand up one of the 80 by 39 pieces of wood and one of the 55 by 39 pieces of wood. They should meet at a 90-degree angle, with one of them slightly overlapping so that the screws can be put in so they will hold together. Once these are both stood up, screw in 2 screws using the power drill. One screw is drilled in 10 cm from the top and the other screw is drilled in 10 cm from the bottom. Once these 2 pieces of wood are screwed together, get the second piece of wood that measures 80 by 39 cm. This is then stood up at a 90-degree angle with the other end of the 59 by 39 cm wood that is already screwed to the larger piece. Once this is stood up at a 90-degree angle and is slightly overlapping, 2 screws are then screwed in using the power drill. One screw is drilled in 10 cm from the top of the wood and the other screw is drilled in at 10 cm from the bottom of the wood. After these 3 pieces have all been screwed together, the final piece of wood, which measures 55 by 39 cm, is stood up at the end of the 2 larger pieces. This is stood at a 90-degree angle to both of the larger pieces and slightly overlapping them both. Then 4 screws can be drilled in, 2 on either side of the wood. On either side, one screw is drilled in at 10 cm from the top of the wood and the other screw is drilled in at 10 cm from the bottom of the wood. Once this rectangular structure has been created, then the roof piece is ready to be screwed on. Begin by screwing the 2 hinges onto the back piece of the hide. This is the piece of the wood that does not have the arc structure cut out of it. One hinge is screwed 20 cm from the left of the wood and the other hinge is screwed 20 cm from the right of the wood. So there is a gap of 40 cm between either hinge. After the hinges are screwed onto the back piece of the hide, the roof piece is ready to be screwed onto the hinges. This part of the process requires assistance from another person. Line up the roof piece so that it is flush with either end of the hide. Then, the other person that you have asked to help will hold this roof piece in place. Then, attach the roof piece to the hinges using 4 screws through the holes that are on the hinges. Once this has been screwed on, lower the lid and then open it again to check that it functions properly and does not fall off. The next step is to secure snow fencing on all the sides of the hide box. This is done using the heavy duty stapler and staples. Begin by putting the hide box on its back so that the arc-like structure is facing upwards towards the ceiling. Then place the snow fencing onto the hide box so that the end of it is flush with the left hand side of the hide box. Then begin to staple this fencing to the hide box using 3 staples in the top, bottom and middle of the snow fencing, every 5 to 10 cm along. Once this fencing has been stapled to the front of the hide box, put the hide box on its side so that the right hand side is facing the ceiling. Then ensure that the snow fencing is level with the top and the bottom of the hide, and then staple this on. Use 3 staples in the top, bottom and middle of the snow fencing every 5 to 10 cm along. Once stapled on, place the hide box on its front so that the arc-like structure is on the ground. Line the fencing up with the hide box so that it is level with the bottom and the top. Then proceed to staple the snow fencing onto the hide box. Use 3 staples on the top, middle and bottom of the snow fencing every 5 to 10 cm along until all of the snow fencing is stapled to the back of the hide box. Then finally put the hide box on its right hand side so the left hand side is facing the ceiling. Line this up the top and the bottom of the wood so that no pieces stick out. Then staple this on using 3 staples in the top, middle and bottom of the snow fencing every 5 to 10 cm along. Once this has been done, all of the snow fencing will be stapled to the hide box. Then you can proceed to cut off any excess bits that are hanging off the box and cut out the arc-like structure so that the snake can get into the hide box. Cut off the excess pieces and the arc structure using the scissors. The foil part of the insulation is acquired by first getting the right size of insulation. Once this has been done, take extra care to remove all of the fiberglass from the foil part. Once most of the fiberglass has been removed, the rest of it can be rubbed off using a dishcloth and water. Once this has been done, use the black duct tape to tape the heat mat to the shiny side of the insulation. Then get the 2 slate pieces and put them on the floor so that they are flush and create a rectangle. Then the heat mat and the insulation are taped to the slate using black duct tape so that once this is on the roof, the heat mat will heat up the slate for the snake. Then put a line of glue on all the edges of the hide box ceiling. Once this has been done, ask someone to help you lift up the slate. Lift the slate and place it on top of the hide and make sure that all the glue is touching the slate so that it will stay onto the ceiling. Then leave it to dry for around 1 to 2 hours. Once this is dried, the hide is placed into the enclosure. It is placed into the enclosure so that the back left of the hide is flush with the back left corner of the enclosure. Once the hide is in place, a piece of astroturf is placed inside. This needs to be placed inside so that it is flush with all the corners of the hide and no parts are sticking up. The next step is to place the water bowl into the enclosure. Place it in the enclosure in the front right corner. Place it in the enclosure so there is a 20 cm gap between the front of the water bowl and the front of the enclosure. The right hand side of the water bowl should be flush with the right hand side of the enclosure. Leave this gap so that the rocks can be placed around the water bowl, but do not yet fill the water bowl with water. Then get the 8 rocks and place them around the water bowl. Place them around the front and the left hand side of the water bowl. Place them so that they are level with the top of the water bowl. The next step is to make the hammock. Firstly, lie down the roll of green windbreaker material. Then measure out a rectangle of 140 cm by 124 cm. Once measured out, cut this off with the scissors. Once this is cut out, fold the material in half so that the width, the 124 cm measurement, is halved to 62 cm. Once this has been folded in half, the 3 open sides of the windbreaker material need to be secured shut. This is done using small cable ties. Use 1 small cable tie every inch down the sides of the green windbreaker material so that it is sealed off and there isn't a gap big enough for the snake to get into. Once sealed shut, cut off the excess cable ties. Then proceed to secure the hammock to the roof of the enclosure. It is secured in the back left corner of the enclosure. Secure the hammock to the roof of the enclosure using 5 or 6 cable ties on either side. Put the cable ties through the material and through the roof of the ceiling. Pull them tight and cut off the excess using the scissors. The next step is to add the artificial plants into the enclosure. The first plant is secured in the back right hand corner of the enclosure. It is secured onto the end of the smaller log using 2 large cable ties. The first cable tie is placed at the bottom of the plant and is pulled tightly and the excess is cut off using scissors. The second large cable tie is placed around a quarter of the way up the plant is again pulled tightly and the excess cut off with scissors. The second plant is placed in the top back right hand corner of the enclosure, near the top of the larger log. This is secured to the ceiling using 3 cable ties on the stalk of the plant. Pull the cable ties tight and cut off the excess using scissors. After secured to the ceiling, gently pull the leaves down so that they fan out and it looks bigger. The third plant is placed in the centre of the enclosure on the right hand side so it is facing the front of the enclosure where the door is. Use 3 cable ties on the stalk of the plant, pull them tight and cut off the excess using scissors. Gently pull the leaves down to make the plant look bigger and more aesthetically pleasing. The fourth plant is placed in the front right corner of the enclosure so that it covers up the end of the smallest piece of rope in the front right corner. Use 3 cable ties on the stalk of the plant, pull them tightly and cut off the excess with scissors. Then gently pull the leaves down so as to fan it out. The fifth plant is placed in front of the hammock on the left hand side. Secure it using 3 cable ties on the stalk of the plant, pull them tightly and cut off the excess using scissors. Then gently pull the leaves to spread the plant out. The sixth plant is placed in front of the fifth plant on the left hand side. Use 3 cable ties on the stalk of the plant to secure it to the roof. Pull these tightly and cut off the excess using scissors. Then fan the leaves out to make it look bigger. The final plant is the longest plant and measures 240 cm long. Because this is so long, it is placed on the back of the enclosure on the left hand side. This is secured so that there are 2 sections going down from the top of the enclosure. One of the sections will measure 160 cm and the other section will measure 80 cm. Once it is held in place, use 3 or 4 cable ties to secure it to the roof. Pull these tightly and cut off the excess using scissors. After the plants have been secured, the next step is to secure the black sugar paper to the back of the enclosure on the outside. This is done using 12 sheets of black sugar paper which measure 51 cm by 66 cm each. The first 2 sheets of black sugar paper are placed on the top right hand side of the enclosure. The first sheet is placed so that it is flush with the top right hand corner of the enclosure. Once it is flush, sellotape the black sugar paper onto the enclosure. Then the second piece of sugar paper is placed overlapping the first piece to cover the small section that cannot be reached by the first piece. Once this has been placed on, secure it to the back using sellotape. Then this is repeated on the right hand side for the middle and bottom of the enclosure. Then that entire process is repeated on the left hand side of the enclosure, ensuring that no glass can be seen. The next step is to clean the glass to remove all the dirt and fingerprints from the inside and outside. Use a water and vinegar solution that is 3 parts water, 1 part vinegar. Put this into a spray bottle and spray the glass, then proceed to clean the glass using the dishcloth. Do this for all the glass on the inside and outside of the enclosure. Once this has been done, if there are any patches that are still wet, use paper towels to dry them. The final step is to introduce the snake to its enclosure. This is done by removing the snake from its holding tank and holding it at the entrance. Hold the snake so it is just inside the enclosure and allow the snake to move from you in its own time. Once the snake has fully moved off you and is fully in the enclosure, the door can be shut and locked. From my project, I found that my enclosure did not have a negative effect on the health of the carpet python. This is because the enclosure replicates its natural environment as much as possible. This is good as it helps to reduce stress in the snake and also helps the welfare of the snake. Also, the room is constantly kept at 28 degrees Celsius on a thermostat. This is the recommended temperature for carpet pythons, which also helps keep the snake in good health. I also found that the snake did not eat for the first 3 months of being at college. To try and get the snake to eat, a sign was put on the enclosure to inform students and staff to stop handling the snake. Also, the right hand side and half of the left hand side of the enclosure were blacked out using sugar paper. This was to make the snake feel like it wasn't being watched from all angles and give it more privacy so it may feel more comfortable and eat. This not eating could have been due to 2 things: being extremely stressed in its new environment, or it also could have been because the snake was in breeding season, and males tend to not eat during the breeding season. I also found that its first shed in the enclosure was in pieces. After some research, I found that this can be due to the stress of a new environment, so it was not a big issue. And after its first shed, all the sheds after have all been in one piece. I accept my experimental hypothesis, H1, which was that the carpet python will maintain good health due to optimum enclosure design. I accept this as even though it did not eat for the first 3 months, and its first shed was in pieces, these two issues can both be to the stress of a new environment, or because it was in the breeding season. As stated in my results, I found that the snake did not eat for the first 3 months in college. At first this was a worrying issue, as we did not know why the snake would not eat, but after asking the previous owner we found out the snake was in breeding season, and it does not tend to eat during the breeding season. We were not worried for the first few weeks, as it was to be expected the snake would not eat in its new environment even though we offered it food. The first shed of the snake was also in pieces. This is not natural for snakes, as it should all be in one. The shed being in pieces could have been because of the stress of a new environment, which I found out when I researched it. The sheds after were all fine and in one piece. The main strength of my project is that the enclosure replicates the natural environment as much as possible. This is the main strength as it is the one that affects the snake the most, and because the enclosure replicates the natural environment as much as possible, the snake should be less stressed and should like the new environment a lot more. Another main strength is of my research, as my research to what the snake can and can't have in the enclosure was very well done. I spent many hours trying to find out what the snake can and can't have in the enclosure, and then decided which ones I wanted for my snake. Also, when it came to doing the practical, I was very well organised, as I did all the jobs for the practical in order which made sense, so that I wasn't getting tangled up and stuck in the enclosure when trying to do something with it. A weakness could be that I did not stick to my schedule of operations, as not sticking to this can lead to being unorganised, not managing your time well, and potentially failing project. Although I did not stick to my schedule of operations, I still managed to complete my project in time and effectively. This is because the snake arrived at a different time to what I thought it would on my schedule of operations, so I was able to adjust and still complete my project. Another weakness could have been that I could have done a little bit more research, as before I started the practical, some of my research, like the temperament and diet, were not fully researched. This could have been because I was more focused on what the snake can and can't have in the enclosure, and I was more focused on the more practical sides of it. If I was to do this project again, the thing I would do differently is the research. I would ensure that I do not just focus on what the snake can and can't have in the enclosure, as even though this is the most important aspect, I still need to know the basic things like its natural environment, its diet, and its temperament. Overall, my project was very effective. This is because my enclosure is very aesthetically pleasing and attracts a lot of attention from visitors. My project is also effective for the snake, as because it replicates the natural environment as much as possible, the snake did not develop any new health issues and maintained a good standard of health. I also developed quite a few practical skills, as during the practical I came across a few problems. One of them was trying to get the cable ties through the holes in the ceiling and back through around the pieces that I was trying to stick to the roof. To overcome this, I folded a bit down of the cable tie and bit it so that it was properly folded. I then put the folded piece through the hole in the roof. Then as the folded piece went entirely through, it bounced back and I could pull it down and it would come through another hole, where I could then properly use the cable tie and tie it on. My planning was effective, as there were no issues with the snake arriving and not having the enclosure set up, although there was an issue where I did not know which snake we were getting, as at first I was researching an enclosure for a Burmese python. Then, after a discussion with Chris, I found out that we might be getting a carpet python, which then eventually I was told we were getting a carpet python, so I had to do more research for another snake. I did not follow my schedule of operations, but I still managed to finish my projects properly and effectively. This is because there was a lot of confusion about when the snake was going to arrive at the college, and it was very last minute when I was told the snake was going to arrive. Even though it was the last minute I was told when the snake was arriving, I still had a lot of time to set up the enclosure for the snake. So even though I did not follow my schedule of operations, this did not matter too much, as I still followed it, just not on the correct dates, and the project was still completed in time.